Common sense might tell you that the bigger a place is, and the more time and money went into creating it, the less likely it is to be abandoned. After all, why would anyone want to abandon something they'd invested so much of their wealth into creating? And why would nobody want to buy such a place if it became available? Nevertheless, there are some massive and majestic places that have been left to fend for themselves over the years, and we're bringing the best of them to you in this video. The British Isles are covered in impressive mansions and palaces, and not all of them are currently occupied. Loftus Hall in the Hook Peninsula of County Wexford in Ireland is among the number of vast empty homes in the region. But when you hear about some of the stories connected with the building, perhaps that isn't surprising. It's said that it's not only haunted by the ghost of a young woman, but also by the malevolent presence of the devil itself. There's been a grand home at the site of Loftus Hall since 1170, although the mansion in its current form wasn't built until 1350. The building was once of such significance that it was attacked by English soldiers during the Irish Confederate Wars in 1642. But the attack was repelled, and the hall remained in Irish hands. Within the last century, it has briefly served as a convent and then a hotel that closed in the late 1990s. It's been empty ever since then, although it's believed to belong to a private owner who, some people say, is Bono from U2. If Bono does own it, he doesn't live here. But he does allow guided tours to take place on the grounds, many of which attract those interested in the paranormal. Not all of our impressive abandoned locations exist above the ground. As an example, here's the so-called Mole Facility, a massive abandoned underground power station beneath the ground of Sevastopol Bay in Crimea. Construction work on these enormous caverns began in the 1930s and finished in the 1950s. By the time it was all finished, the site had become a labyrinth, covering 100,000 square feet and split across 5 stories. To this day, it's the biggest underground structure in Crimea. It lived a second life during its construction. During the Second World War, it housed Special Combine No. 1, containing the arsenal as Sevastopol and protecting the arsenal of the city as it came under siege. These days, the 2 25,000 kilowatt turbo generators that were once housed here are gone, and the site is mostly abandoned. Some work still goes on at the furthest reaches of the facility, but even the people who work there don't know what hides at the bottom of the ancient staircases, or in the lonely, darkened side rooms. Given the fact that the world's population is expanding and people will always need doctors and nurses, it's strange that any hospital should become abandoned or unwanted, much less a hospital as large as Hovrinskaya Hospital in Moscow, Russia. There is an explanation, though. Despite the fact that it looks like a grand, modern structure from the outside, it was never completely finished. Work began on building the facility in 1980 but stopped in 1985 due to a lack of funds. The brutalist-style shell has become a popular destination for urban explorers, and may even have influenced the Umbrella Corporation logo from the Resident Evil video games. But none of the planned 1,300 treatment beds were ever installed, and the hospital never treated a single patient. Over time, the local community around the hospital began to report ghost sightings within the grounds of the buildings, leading to the creation of a horror movie called Hovrino. The local authorities decided enough was enough in 2018 and earmarked Hovrinskaya Hospital for demolition. The hospital is far from being the only fascinating large construction project that was abandoned before completion in Russia. There's also the ruin of a forgotten nuclear power plant, which still has its engine room, pipes, and RBMK-1000 reactor on site. The precise location of the plant is kept secret, but we have plenty of images from it thanks to the activities of urban explorers. The site is unguarded and can be accessed through several entrance points, many of which are connected by the ladders that scale the exterior shell of the empty facility. The engine room is particularly vast and impressive, reminding many people who've visited it of the feeling of standing inside a cathedral. albeit a cathedral made of unforgiving steel and concrete. For reasons nobody has ever been able to explain, the light is still on inside the reactor room, even though no staff have ever worked there, and there's no reason for the facility to be provided with power. Perhaps it was more close to being finished than anyone ever realized. Perhaps there might even still be some dangerous radioactive material at the site. When most people think of Russia's attempts to defeat the United States of America in the space race, they think of the creation and failure of the Buran space shuttle. Most people know the story of the rocket that briefly went into space, but far fewer are aware that 2 more rockets are still waiting to be launched, hidden away in Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, given the length of time that the Cosmodrome has been abandoned for, it's reasonable to assume that they are never going to fly. Nobody seems to know what stage of completion these rockets were at before the decision was taken to down tools and stop working, but they appear to have all the right parts in all the right places. The exterior shells appear to be fully finished, and a glance into the cockpit reveals a whole array of glorious 1980s space-age technology that nobody ever got the chance to use. The years haven't been too kind to this decrepit facility, though it's largely exposed to the elements, and the rockets are covered in bird droppings. We completely understand why most people don't want to go anywhere near the abandoned site of Central State Hospital in Milledgeville, Georgia, USA. It was used to provide dubious treatments to patients suffering from mental illnesses, and it's surrounded by more than 25,000 unmarked graves. More than 200 buildings stand on the 2,000 acres of land that make up the site, and at one point, this was the biggest mental health treatment facility in the whole world. The hospital opened its doors for the first time in 1842 under the charming name of the Georgia State Lunatic, Idiot, and Epileptic Asylum. Despite the title, things seemed promising back then. It didn't use chains or ropes to restrain patients, and the residents worked alongside staff as part of their rehabilitation. Unfortunately, by the 1960s, it had more than 12,000 patients and barely over 100 staff. Neglect set in, and tales of mistreatment became common. Somehow, it was allowed to continue its practice until 2010, but it's now been silent for a decade, standing as nothing more than an eerie testament to a disgraceful past. Sticking with the theme of mental health treatment centers in the United States of America, this is the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, New York. It wasn't just the world's largest mental health facility when it opened in 1931, it was the largest hospital of any kind. The site is so large that it once had its own power plant, fire department, and courtrooms. During the 1950s, 13,000 patients were accommodated here, but by the 1990s, it had fallen into a deep decline. There's still some activity at the site, but the activity is confined to one small portion of the site that's still cleaned, maintained, and modernized. The rest of it has been left to rot, and the rot is severe. The shattered treatment rooms and fire station of the old hospital are popular with urban explorers, but unfortunately they're just as popular with criminals. The police are a regular presence in the disused parts of Pilgrim Psychiatric Center, and so the safest place to see it is from a distance. When power plant Urkie opened in Bytom, Poland in late 1920, it was a source of great pride both within the region and the country at large. This vast facility was Poland's largest power station and put the provisions of several neighboring countries to shame. You might have seen abandoned power stations before, but you've probably never seen one this pretty. That's because this one was made according to a modernist architectural style, designed by George and Emil Zillman. Some stories say that it was originally to become an explosives factory, but was repurposed before it was even finished. The plant carried on working all the way through the Second World War, with an output of 100 megawatts. That made it one of the most productive power plants in the whole European continent during those dark times. Its usefulness came to an end during the 1990s, and since then it's been used for a variety of purposes, including concerts. There are currently plans to have it turned into a museum, although some groups would rather see it left as it is and preserved. Locally, it's listed as one of the 7 architectural wonders of the Silesian province. Casa Sperimentale in Italy may be one of the strangest abandoned locations we've ever looked at on this channel. It's hard to even know what to call it, although describing it as a brutalist treehouse would be a good start. The architectural relic can be found in a little-known hamlet called Fregene, which might explain why most people don't even know it exists. It isn't considered to be finished, and nor will it ever be. Its architect and sole builder passed away in 1995. Is this a house, an office, or a sculpture made of strange geometric shapes? In some ways, it's all three. Giuseppe Perugini started work on the site during the 1960s and always saw it as a holiday home, although over time he grew to also consider it an experiment with living spaces and traditional ideas about architecture. The only way in is through a bright red staircase that can be pulled away and drawn up into the trees, thereby cutting it off from the world outside. Various parts of the structure are modular and could be removed without causing damage to the remainder of the building. It's a unique place, so hopefully a suitable purpose can one day be found for it. Back in 1983, the Soviet Union ordered the construction of a television tower in the city of Yekaterinburg. They were still in the process of building it in 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolved, and the collapse of the Union doomed the tower to a permanent state of semi-completion and abandonment. It was never used to broadcast a single television signal, although it did hold the distinction of being the tallest abandoned structure on the face of the planet until the abandonment of some of Detroit's skyscrapers during the 2008 global financial crisis. While it never served the purpose it was intended for, it did become popular with urban climbers and base jumpers. Sadly, not every base jumper who threw themselves off the top of the 1,180-foot tall tower survived their meeting with the ground at the bottom of it, and so climbing access was sealed off shortly after the turn of the century. The city's authorities finally got around to demolishing the tower in late 2018, although an app still allows people to view digital recreations of it from several parts of Yekaterinburg. During the Cold War, both the United States of America and the Soviet Union were busy creating new types of weapons, and new places to store those weapons. On the American side, the weapon of choice in the event of an emergency was the intercontinental ballistic missile known as Titan I, and the places they were kept were largely in Colorado. There are 6 former missile silos hiding under Colorado, the largest of which is in Aurora. The 100-foot-long missiles are long since gone, but the large maze-like silos are still there and still open despite being formally decommissioned in 1965. There's no power to the tunnels, and so those who have broken in during the years since then to take a look around have done so with torches and seemingly without a sense of danger. The graffiti on the walls is doom-laden and foreboding, and in many places the stairways and walkways are so badly rusted that they could collapse at any moment. This silo is just as dangerous as it ever was, but now it's dangerous to the people inside it, rather than the people outside it. Not every plan drawn up by Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler was related to capturing or destroying the rest of Europe. Some of his ideas were about leisure and tourism for the German people. According to Hitler, every good German deserved one beach holiday every year, and those beach holidays would take place under strict disciplinary conditions in places like Prora in Binz. The sprawling network of 8 buildings was erected on Rügen Island during the 1930s and contained 10,000 prison cell-style rooms that would have housed German tourists during their forced vacation, where they could be expected to be woken up early every morning and encouraged to take part in healthy exercise regimes. Had Prora ever been finished, it would have been the first of a series of resorts like this, but the outbreak of the Second World War at the end of the decade gave Hitler bigger fish to fry. The abandoned buildings eventually became residential care homes for the elderly, but have been abandoned since the end of the 1990s. The last news on them was that they might be converted into highly desirable condos. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.